The following is a production of Texas Lutheran University. For more information, please visit tlu.edu.
I'm just going to introduce.
This is not John, okay? This is Chad.
I'm Chad. My name is Chad Thompson, and I'm with Thrivent Financial for Lutherans. Recognize a couple faces, but we got a whole handful of new people here. And from what I understand, you guys are the best and the brightest leaders in TLU, is what I've been told. And we've been talking with Sam a little bit, and he's been bragging on y'all about how great you are and the potential that you have. So I feel really honored to be here today with you. I think you'll find with that, being a part of who you are, our speaker today is going to be very interesting. And we just got done watching him speak, and I'm excited to hear round two myself personally. But how many of you have heard of Thrivent Financial for Lutherans? Okay, a couple of you along the way. I work for Thrivent Financial for Lutherans, and we're sponsoring John being down here working with Sam. We work together to get this put together. And just a couple brief words on Thrivent. If you don't know who we are, we're a faith-based, not-for-profit financial services organization. So basically, we help families and individuals work with their financial goals and making sure they reach their financial dreams, like retiring, like getting kiddos off to a fine institution like this one, taking care of risk protection like life insurance, health insurance, all those different financial goals that people have. But the fact that we're faith-based and that we're also a not-for-profit organization makes us really unique. We're this large Fortune 500 financial services company, but we wake up every day and our organization just has a different culture because we don't report to Wall Street. We report to our clients who are also members and owners of our organization. And the fact that we're not for profit creates a whole lot of opportunities. So what we do is, how many of you have heard like Paul Newman's Own? You know, you can go out and get salad dressing and spaghetti sauce, that type of stuff. And Newman's Own does that for charitable purposes. So they go out, they have a business, generate revenue that is balanced with expenses, and then there's money left over to do charitable things with that. Very similar to the way Thrivent works, financial services, we go out, work with our clients and members. That generates revenue for the organization. We manage our expenses. Don't have to pay corporate income tax, but what we would, we turn around and work with congregations, communities. You all heard of Habitat for Humanity? Very large sponsor, one of the largest corporate sponsors of Habitat for Humanity. All of that comes from our not-for-profit status as an organization. So as we're out there helping people with finances, the better we do at that, the more good and impact we're able to have in congregations and communities. So that's a little bit about us, and through some of that charitable and benevolent, that's actually how we're able to get John down here today. Some of those funds go to help do things like what we're doing here today. So enough about me, enough about the organization. I'll talk about who our speaker is today. John Busacker. I guarantee you it's going to be a great conversation. Very nice, small, intimate format, so a lot of opportunity for give and take, question answering, that type of deal. But John is the president of a company called Inventure Corporation, and it's a global leadership consulting firm. So he consults all over the world. 6 continents he's been on, working with large Fortune 500 massive companies, very large prestigious universities, you know, all over the place. Very top class organizations look to our speaker today to help them grow and develop leaders. You know, so great opportunity for that here today. He also is the founder of a company called LifeWorth Organization, which is a life planning creative resource company. He's the author of 2 different books. One is called 8 Questions God Can't Answer, and the second one is called Fully Engaged, which is about fully engaged leadership. We'll be hearing more about that today. Lives in Minnesota, so you might notice a little bit of a northern accent, much like myself. I've got kind of a northern accent myself. Is married to his wife, Carol. He's got 2 children, Joshua and Brett. Avid explorer. We were talking on the way down here, summited Mount Kilimanjaro, does a lot of skiing and other just, you know, great sort of, great adventure sorts of things, very charitable minded, has done great things for people all over this world and just a great speaker and a wonderful person. And with that, let's give a great big round of John Busacker.
Thank you. So my question is, are you here for the talk or for the lunch? That's my question. Thank you for, Chad, thanks for your kind words and for coming. So I want to back up a little bit, and you're going to all receive a copy of the book Fully Engaged, and I want to talk a little bit more about that. Those of you that were at the previous session, I want to actually dig into one other little part of that book, but I actually want to back up a little bit and share a few thoughts from the book that I wrote that came out 2 years ago, titled 8 Questions God Can't Answer, which was a perplexing title to people of faith. It's like, what? I did it purely for the marketing, okay? So, no. Actually, the point of view of the book is simply this, that how does Jesus teach? Even more than parables, although most parables have this embedded in them. So what are parables, by the way? So what is a parable? It's a story, right? It's a story that Jesus would tell that is in the theme and the tone and the surroundings. So everyone that was hearing the parable could put themselves right into the story because he was talking about their surroundings, their language. When we look at the parable, sometimes we go, wow, what a weird story. Well, it wasn't weird to the people that were hearing it in the terms of they could see everything that he was describing. What was weird about almost every parable was it was almost exactly opposite their life experience, though. Okay? But embedded in almost every parable is something else, which is actually Jesus' principal teaching method. What is that?
Relationship.
Always in relationship, but I'm talking about more the methodology. Yes, indeed, he was absolutely relational, and relational almost in a very personal person. I mean, he surrounded himself with a tight-knit group of followers that walked with him and talked with him and lived with him for 3 years, who then went out along with some others and changed the world. But how did he teach?
He lived it. He walked the walk.
Yes, but again, I'm not getting the answer I'm looking for here. Clearly, that is absolutely true too. I mean, so when you talk about a person having integrity where their actions line up with who they truly are, Jesus was perfect at that, okay? Where he was exactly who he was in everything that he did, okay? Which, of course, is your actions speak louder than your words. Of course, that's true. Yes?
Is it questioning? Like
Questions, yes. Thank you. Ding, 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 ding. Okay, good. All right. Yes, so, and this was actually surprising to me. I don't know if that's surprising to you. To me, that was surprising. Let me give you a kind of a picture of the faith that I grew up with. I grew up a Lutheran in a Lutheran home, wonderful family, went to a Lutheran elementary school. So I was surrounded by faith for much of my life growing up, but all of a sudden to encounter a Jesus that taught with questions versus giving answers, this was different than what I grew up with. So it was like this. When I was a little boy, one of the things I did with my father, my dad is an avid reader. He's now 83 years old. He's still a voracious reader. He's constantly going to the library. He doesn't buy any books, doesn't even buy my book. I have to give him a book, all right? So it's like, come on, give me a break here. He goes to the library every week, most every week, and checks out books. And that's part of his pastime. He's an avid reader of all sorts of different things. Well, I used to go with him when I was a little boy. It was just father-son time to the Milwaukee Public Library in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where I grew up. In the library, this big downtown library, is a 4-story building with marble columns out in front of it and marble steps you go inside. It's really pretty impressive building, right? You would go inside and there'd be a woman sitting in, this is my memory as a little boy, there was a woman sitting inside of a kind of a circular cubicle surrounded by books in this as you walked in, right? And she was kind of an old, kind of shriveled up old lady, all right? And she wasn't very nice either. She was kind of a crabby old shriveled up lady. And she sat on this stool inside of this thing. And the stool was on wheels, right? So she would sit on this stool and she would just wait, just like this. She'd just sit there, kind of giving you the evil eye when you walk, what are you doing in my library sort of look, right? And then eventually the phone would ring, this black rotary phone. Remember, well, probably none of you even know what a rotary phone is, do you? I mean, it's like a phone with a cord. Can you imagine that? A phone with a cord, right? So there was this, and a dial would go, right? So the phone would ring, ding, 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 and she'd pick it up and she'd go, hello. She'd listen, and then she would take the phone and she'd slam it down on the car. I can only imagine the person on the other end of the phone go, oh, ouch. And then she'd start wheeling around in her stool on wheels, looking at all of these books that were around her. And eventually she'd grab a book off, she'd leaf through it, she'd get to what she was looking for, she'd pick back up the phone, and she would give the person on the other end the answer to their question. You know what her job was? She was ready reference for the whole city of Milwaukee. I've got a question about how to make a perfect, whatever, and she would look up in some cookbook the answer to this question and give the person the answer, or my lawnmower isn't working, so how do I da-da-da-da-da, and she'd look up the answer to the question. Do you think she's still there? No, what's her name now? Google, right, exactly. Mrs. Google, right? So she's long gone. But this was the faith, actually, that I grew up with. It's like, I'm going to shoot up a question to God, and He's going to airmail me back, like the little lady on the stool, the answer to my question. Does God work like that? Nope. And He didn't teach like that in the form of Jesus at all. In fact, He was asked over 100 questions, 180 some questions, if you look through the 4 Gospels. And of those, He directly answers how many? 3. Okay? So He's asked a question, and almost always what He does is He returns it in the form of another question. Or He would tell a story. That's a really good question. Let me tell a story, okay? Or He would completely blow the person off. He'd just ignore it. Because a lot of times when the questions were being asked, why were the questions being asked? Yeah, to trap them. So here, this methodology hasn't changed. It's as if, think of Him as a presidential candidate. Okay? And we're going to try to get him painted into a corner, so we're going to ask him about the wedge issue of the day. What do you think about gays in the military? Okay? Or the issue of the day was, what do you think about divorce? So now, rather than answer the question, he would take this kind of prickly issue, earth issue, thing that I'm going to try to paint you into the corner and pin you and get you to say something and go, oh, you're one of those. Instead, he would elevate it to a whole different level of discourse by saying, that's an interesting question about divorce. Let me just talk instead about what relationships should be like. And let me give you a story to answer that question. So he would elevate it to, rather than saying good, bad, right, wrong, yes, no, black, white, and do that. He asked questions to draw people in to the conversation and to have them do some of their own discovery to come up with the answer. Okay? This was, for me, revolutionary. It changed the way that I think and act as a man of faith. It changed how I interact with people out. As Chad said, I'm a small business person who spends a lot of his time as a consultant out in mostly secular, large, global organizations where there are people of faith or not people of faith, where talking about faith isn't probably, you have to be subtle of how you weave it in to the conversation, because it's not something that you can be overt with. It's no longer acceptable in most of the companies that I work in. And so adopting this methodology, the same methodology of asking questions, rather than believing I necessarily even have the answer, has changed everything. It invites people into a conversation. It gives people the opportunity to weigh in themselves. It makes me as a person of faith way less threatening to them if they are or aren't a person of faith, because I'm just asking them in. So here's some of the questions that Jesus asked that are great questions. It says in the Bible that Scripture is living and active, which means that it isn't just some dusty book that sits on a shelf that occasionally we grab off to take a look for something. It's living and active. It's just as applicable today as when the words were first breathed, right? And everything that's in there applies right here and right now. So, question. One of the first questions he asked, great question that engages people. What do you want? Really? What do you want? Question that followed shortly behind that is actually perfectly paired as part 2 of question 1. Second question is, why are you so afraid? Why are you so afraid? Because I don't know about you, in your, wherever you are in your own faith journey, I can tell you without any reservation that when I sense God calling me into something, saying, John, how about if you go here? How about if you do this? I'm sensing God's kind of in the way that how do you know if God is kind of calling you into something? How do you sense that? How do you know?
Whenever you try really hard to fight against it, but it just kind of keeps on popping up.
Yeah, good. Yeah, there's this, it's like this gravitational pull, right? I'm trying not to do this, and I still, well, how do you know if that's a God thing or just a thing? How do you know? Because that's true, right? I mean, one of the ways that God calls us into things is by giving us a sense of restlessness. I'm trying to pull away from this, but I keep on getting pulled back in. But there are some things that I get pulled into that aren't necessarily God things, right? That's called sin, right? So, yeah, that's a whole different talk. We're not going there today, okay? So how do we know? Help me out here. This is the audience participation, but you don't get free lunch unless you help me out here. How do we know?
Test it
Against what?
with other people, with mentors or other faith.
Yeah, good. So we can't go it alone. We can easily become legends in our own minds, right? Fool ourselves into believing stuff on our own, that this is where I should be going. I know I'm being called into this. But then you start talking to other people that are wise people that have a sense of who you are in a sense, and they go, what? That's not a, I don't think so. Okay, so that's one. How else? How do we know?
Question yourself.
Yeah, so employing the same methodology of asking questions, continuing to probe. Let me continue to explore this. Is this the right direction? Okay? And the other is Scripture. If it is living and active, if we're looking in the book and what we're thinking we're being called into doesn't match up with, you're going, it may be a great thing, but it's not a God thing. I'm getting called to this, or I feel restless for this, or I feel this pull towards this, but it doesn't jive, it doesn't sync up, it doesn't make sense, okay? Now when I'm sensing that, and I'm testing that, and I'm looking at this, and all the signs are green, I think this is something. The next emotion that I most often feel is fear. Anybody else have that same? You're shaking. Why? Yes. Why is that fear producing?
Because it's a big undertaking. I mean, it's like
Yeah.
you're stepping way out of your comfort zone, and you are
Yeah.
just stepping out into a great unknown. But it's exciting. It's like stirring up all those emotions
Yeah.
all at once.
Yeah, that's right. So if it is truly, many times, if it is truly something that we're being called into, that God is kind of tugging us and pulling us here, more often than not, we're being pulled to something that's bigger than we are. We can't do this on our own, which is fear-producing, right? We want to be able to just do this, but it's not. I am not going to be able to unless God's hand is in this, helping, guiding, supporting, aligning me with other people. I'm toast. It's over, right? I can't do this, and so it's fear-producing, which is why the second question in the book, one of the first questions. And something that Jesus speaks into regularly is, why are you so afraid? That's a great question. I ask myself that all the time. Why am I so fearful here? Here's the setting of the question, which is why these questions are bizarre. The setting is, Jesus has been teaching all day, and he says to his closest followers, let's get into a boat, which that in and of itself wasn't too much because some of them were fishermen, 4 of them were, but the rest of them weren't. So like the dude who was the CPA, the tax guy, he's probably going, a what? A boat? And let's go in this boat across this body of water, which is known for really ferocious storms. And just to make it really interesting, let's do it at night. Okay? So they start to cross over, and this huge storm blows up. Now, Jesus is asleep in the boat, it says. It's like he's, which is either because it's no big deal because he created the weather. It's like, hey, I've seen this before. I created this. Or it's because he's being a man, he's tired. He's been teaching all day. He's worn out. He's tapped out. So he's asleep in the back of the boat. They're going across the lake. This huge storm blows up. I was looking out the window yesterday as I was flying from Dallas to Austin last night, and just off the wing, fortunately a little bit off in the distance, there's this huge storm. The lightning just constant. It was beautiful. I was glad we were like here and it was there, but in the story, the boat is here and the storm is right here on top of them. And at some point, the disciples shake Jesus awake and they go, we're about to drown. And Jesus goes, why are you so afraid? What a dumb question. The answer is obvious, except that it's not obvious at all. Because at the beginning of the story, the invitation, which is kind of this fear-producing sense of I feel like I can't not do this sort of thing, Jesus says, let's go to the other side. Except the other side isn't just the other side of the lake. Jesus and all of his followers were Jews. He's a rabbi. And they're going to the other side of the lake, which is where the Gentiles live. And they're not just any Gentiles, they're the poorest of the poor Gentiles. They're so poor that they live, their homes, many of them are caves that also serve as their graves. Okay? So think Jewish rabbi, followers, going to visit people who are completely unlike them in many ways, and ritually unclean because they're living amongst their dead. That's where we're going tonight in this night crossing. And then to make it really interesting, I think I'll brew up a big storm on the way. Okay? So in almost all of these questions, there's embedded a story behind the story. And Jesus uses them to engage the people around him, not only his closest followers, but all the people that would come and listen to him speak. He would regularly talk in parables, except that a lot of the parables either begin or end with a question. It's like, so what do you think about this? Opening question. Then he'd tell this really odd story, which kind of flips everything on its head. And at the end, he'd go, so what do you think that's about? And they'd go, I don't know. This is totally opposite what I thought. All right? So that has caused me kind of adopting this sort of a questioning faith. Has caused me to be much more engaged, which is topic 2, in who I am as a person of faith, trying to live out my faith out in the real world. Because a lot of things that I thought were black and white, the more I travel, the more I'm with people, who are unlike me, the more questions I have, which is good, I think, because Jesus invites questions. He must invite questions because he asked questions. So if we're somehow fearful in our own faith, that thinking we have to have the answers. I don't know, so I'm going to be really timid in my faith because I don't know what the answer is. You're in good company. Okay? Dive into it. Let me stop there before I transition to topic 2 here. So the first was questions. What questions do you have? But the disclaimer here is, so it was a book on questions, so I don't have any answers. But go ahead and ask any questions you want, okay?
I have a question about the last session, if that's okay.
Fire away.
I didn't ask it last time, but because you talked about burnouts and how they happen, but still needing to stay fully engaged as much as you can. But I guess from a personal experience, it's really hard to stay that engaged 24/7 all the time and not experience burnouts. So what's the balance there?
Yeah, great question. So here's for those of you that weren't at the last session, let me just give you the quick what's behind the question here. Think of a continuum from left to right here, okay? And the sweet spot, we're talking about energy. As human beings, we have so much energy. Our most precious resources are time and our energy. And we have, if the sweet spot is where we're right in the middle of this continuum, where we're fully engaged, committed, where we're bringing all of our energy to something, the opposite ends of the continuum. One end is burnout, where we're doing too much, so we're just burning ourselves out. We're committing to too many things. We're trying to do too many things at one time. We're trying to spin too many plates all at the same time. That's burnout. And at the other end is what I called rust out, which is we're just kind of putting it on hold, on autopilot. We're just kind of parking our energy, saying, well, when everything kind of gets back to normal, I'll get back engaged. But in the meantime, I'm just going to kind of hang out, okay? That's rust out. The sweet spot, again, is in the middle where we're all in, but we're not all in to the point where we're burning out. Let me give you the answer with this is actually in the book, so thanks for that. I'll give you the $20 on the break, okay? So, so here's this is one of my favorite stories. It's in this book, which you're all going to get fully engaged. The subtitle is How to Do Less and Be More, How to Do Less and Be More. Here's a story from the Old Testament, okay, that can kind of just slide right by. You kind of go, that's really a weird story. I don't get at all what this is talking about. Let me give you the story and then talk about how it pertains exactly to what you're asking, all right? So here's the story. It says Moses used to take a tent, all right, and he used to pitch it outside the camp some distance away, calling it the tent of meeting. So he would take this tent, he'd go outside of where all the Israelites were kind of camped, and he'd pitch just this tent by himself, and many times with Joshua, a young leader that he was mentoring at the time, okay? So anyone inquiring of the Lord would go to the tent of meeting outside the camp, and whenever Moses went out to the tent, all the people rose and stood at the entrance to their tents, watching Moses until he entered the tent of meeting. All right, is this a weird story or what? So Moses would take a tent, he would go outside of the camp and he'd set it up. Everyone would see, oh, there he goes. Everyone would stand at the entrance to their tent and watch Moses go and wait for when he came back. Why? Why would they stand and wait?
Moses is like their leader.
Yep. Yeah, but he's their leader every day. But why was this important, this particular, okay, he's going now, we're going to wait for him to come back.
This is like meeting with God.
Face to face, it says in Scripture, right on. It says, then the Lord would speak to Moses face to face as one speaks to a friend. Is that a great picture? The Lord would speak to Moses face to face as one speaks to a friend. So he would go out into the tent, they would have an intimate conversation, and people were waiting for when he came back because he'd be bringing back a word. All right? Here's the difference. I work with leaders all day, most days, present company excluded, who never ever go off into the tent. They just do. So they're fully engaged all day long, and then they fall into bed exhausted at night. Then they get up the next morning, and they do, fall into bed fully engaged. Fully exhausted at the end of the day, and get up the next morning. And then come Friday, they're completely tapped out, and so they try to make up for a week of doing that Saturday morning by sleeping in until 7 instead of getting up at 5. Okay? Wow. So this is a picture of two things. All right, this little story, it's a picture of two things. One is spending time in whatever way that you do it. This is a very particular picture, spending time however you do it, where you are quiet, where you're listening, where you're having an intimate conversation, a reflective, prayerful sort of conversation. So instead of just doing, you're actually slowing down, and that's part of, you're engaged in that as well, but it's a much different engagement than when you're doing. Does this make sense? And then the second is, in this case, the one-to-one conversation here is with God. All right, it's a face-to-face as a man speaks with his friend. So the best leaders that I work with, and these, what makes them distinct and unique is they're rare, is they're seldom overcommitted. They're not running hurry-scurry through the day. They have found what is for them the appropriate pace that allows them to be engaged, but they also step out of that regularly, beginning of the day, during the day, end of the day, periodically throughout the year. It's not just a matter of taking a vacation or a long weekend. I mean, they step out of it. One leader I know, when he's in the car, he never listens to the radio or tunes or anything. That's quiet time. Another leader I know starts and he calls it the bookends of the day. Okay, he starts the day and ends the day, leading into the day. What am I going to encounter today? At the end of the day, was I present today? Was I fully engaged in kind of beginning, end of day? A number of leaders that I work with take silent retreats periodically throughout the year. Okay, so they have a rhythm of being on stage and performing as leaders, but then they also have a rhythm of stepping back from that regularly, knowing that if they just are always on, they burn out. Can't do it. Okay? Other questions? It's a good one. What else? Oh, come on. What else?
Going back to your 10 questions that you spoke about.
Yeah.
There's another question in itself, isn't it? I mean, you're looking at all these things, we all value them.
Yeah.
We can't do it all. And I find that I do some very well.
Yes.
And the ones that jumped out at me, you said would jump out at us, and I felt that I don't do some of those well. For example, in my life,
Yeah.
I'm passionate about my work, but I'm more passionate about my family.
Yeah.
And that takes, I want to be available to my family, so that takes a huge amount of time. But
Yeah.
then friendships fall off.
Right.
Because I've taken so much time for my family, who are my friends.
Right.
I don't have time for friends. But then you always hear you have to be in prayer, and we have to do, and I just, I don't know, how do you do that whole 10 thing and find the balance all the time? And then add on to it.
Yeah.
With the whole faith thing, I rated myself very low because I don't think I'll ever be fully engaged in my faith, even though I'm always striving towards it.
Yeah.
Always striving towards it.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'm more engaged in activity, and I'm more engaged with God in this way, but
Yeah.
I'm never fully there ever. So that's always a struggle.
Yeah.
So I guess my question is, how do we balance it? Do we trade them off? Should we be trading them off, or do we find what we're passionate about and emphasize on it?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's two parts to the answer that I'll give, and I'd be curious others here, because I mean, it says that people write about what they need to learn themselves, okay? So that's the disclaimer here. The chapter 6 in the book is titled Drop the Ball, which is a follow-up on chapter 1, which it has the 10 dimensions in it of health and learning and family and work and relationship with loved ones and spiritual life and friendships and community and volunteering and financial. You go forward several chapters, and the suggestion in the book is you can't. Don't try to keep all 10 airborne at the same time, because physically we can't. It'd be nice if we could do all 10, if we could do all 10 well, but we can't. And so it's a matter of letting some things fall, or at least giving ourselves the grace of saying some of these I can keep airborne better and longer and at a greater degree than others. And a lot of times it has to do with what particular stage we are in life, for example. Carol and I are empty nesters now. Our boys are 26 boys. Our young men are 26 and 23 years old. So at this stage of life, we have more time and more energy and more passion for focusing on friendships than we did just in the previous stage. And we were a lot more choosy about spending times with friends in the previous stage because we didn't have much time. We just didn't. And so when our kids were in high school and in college, they were both athletes, and we would go to their sporting events, and they were active in church, and we were doing stuff with that, and they were active in this and that. And so a lot of our life revolved around we wanted to be active with them in that stage of life. Because both of us grew up with parents that weren't as active with them. Well, now they're out, at least temporarily. I'm sure they'll come back, but they're out at least temporarily. And so now we have time for friends that we didn't have. So last Sunday, for example, we went on a 3.5-hour bike ride with another couple of friends. We would never have had taken the time to do that in the so it's a matter of choosing and saying at this stage. And then the other is, and I use this word cautiously, okay? Multitasking. Yeah. There was a great line in the Wall Street Journal a little bit ago. It said what is today called multitasking used to just be called not paying attention. Okay, so yeah. See all these people driving down the road texting. They're not paying attention. They're multitasking, but they're not paying attention fully, right? But we can combine, some things. Those categories are not all in discrete categories. We can be involved in a number of those at the same time and kind of having one engaged with and feeding on another. So our volunteering and our hobbies might be actually around some of our own spiritual life, which might be helping us connect with some friends, which might also be a part of our family life because we are involving different members. So they're not all discrete. I do this, and then I do this, and then okay? But we have to give ourselves grace and say, I'm not, there are stages of my life where it'd be wonderful to be, every morning up at 4 on my knees in prayer and then going to my small group and then hitting up church. And I don't have time for all that. And so how do I be fully engaged and intimate but not beating on myself saying I have to be doing all this stuff? Okay? Any other questions? Yeah.
Just as kind of a follow-up question too, it seems like as I was thinking about that, where I am on the continuum of each of those kind of ebb and flow over time. And I think the awareness that you brought just by asking that question and bringing it front and center, I'm like,
yes,
this is lacking right now.
Right.
Do you think having some sort of mechanism to constantly get that awareness, almost like an alarm clock every now and then to say,
yes,
hey, look at this again. Are you where you want to be? But
yes.
I don't think we allow ourselves to do that. So how do you, how would you recommend getting that awareness?
I am, and I suspect maybe some of you are good at fooling yourselves. I can really fool myself at times and think I'm more engaged than I am, or more balanced than I am, or that, the principal mechanism that I have to kind of call myself back and to check is to be in relationship with a small group of people around me that know me and ask me the tough questions and hold me accountable and know the good, the bad, and the ugly, and can point it out to me when I'm not engaged. Let me give you a perfect example of this. One of a person that was really, really instrumental in lighting the fuse on my own faith. I grew up again in this family, but I met a gentleman shortly after we moved to Minneapolis. At the time, he was 72 years old. And he was for 35 years a missionary in Africa, in the Congo, and then he started a Bible college in Johannesburg, and he brought that curriculum back to the United States and planted a school in Minneapolis called Village School of the Bible. And what he did was he would take students from cover to cover through the Scripture, and he would do it in this way. It was a one-year curriculum, and you had to show up for every lecture. You teach a 2-hour lecture every Wednesday night, and you had to show up with, see if you would like doing school this way. You had to show up with your paper in advance of the lecture. All right, so the professor was going to teach, but you had to do the paper on what he was going to teach on before he would teach on the subject. And he would stand at the door, this tough old bird, 72 years old. He'd stand at the door with his hand out like this. And if you showed up that week without a paper, he'd go, better luck next week. And if you showed up 2 weeks in a row, he'd go, I hope you come back next year. You were done. That was it. Anyway, shortly after I started taking the class, I went out to breakfast with him. And his methodology of connecting with people was to fire questions at them. So he would ask a question, then he'd ask another question, he'd ask another question, he'd ask another question. You're still processing the first question. He's on question number 4, but invariably in about the 4th or 5th question, he would get to something that was like right here on your heart. And so the very first time I met him, he was asking these questions, and then he listens to my answers, and then he looks me right in the eye and he goes, you're bored. I've hardly met this guy, right? You're bored. And the longer you stay bored, the more boring you're going to become. Ouch. And he was right. He was absolutely right. And a year later, I changed careers to what I'm doing now, 16 years now. But he was able to discern that, divine that, by asking questions and listening intently to the conversation. So it took another person. Sometimes it takes, in all of those different areas, the health, the learning, the spiritual life, the relationships, it takes other people to help us to know where we are and to help us discern, because we might be fooling ourselves. Okay? Any other questions? Then I'll turn it back and we can eat lunch. Anything else? I hope this has been helpful, interesting. The book, Fully Engaged, has 3 parts to it. The first are 3 chapters on awareness that kind of look into where are you right now. The second is alignment, is what you're doing lining up with who you really are. And then the third is 3 chapters on action. How do I consistently take action on this over time at whatever stage, wherever I am? And then each chapter ends with questions and with practices. If you actually want to do something with this, you can test it out, try it out, put it on, take it out on the road, okay? So I hope that there's some benefit in there too. The chapters, I write like I read, so everything is really short. Because I like books that I can read like on an airplane from Dallas to San Antonio, okay? So, so it's like really quick. And lots of stories kind of woven through there, because that's what sticks with me is stories. And so I hope that it's a blessing to all of you. And again, thanks for coming out. Yeah. Okay? Yeah. You're welcome.
Students at TLU engage in high-impact educational experiences that include civic engagement, aesthetic expression, critical thinking, and a focus on intercultural knowledge in a community that welcomes the interplay of faith and reason.